Hello, and I would like to welcome Darren Menabney today to this conversational series of how we can change the world of work. Darren, I'd like to do a little bit of an introduction to you now. I've got a bit of a
Sure.
thing that I'm going to read out here. So I'd really like to welcome Darren to our session today. Darren is a global business communication consultant. Darren helps individuals and organizations overcome the challenges of collaborating and communicating remotely and across cultures. So needed at the moment. So the remote work and cross-cultural work.
Hmm.
Darren leads global human resource projects for Rico Company Limited and teaches international MBA students as a professor at the Graduate School of Management, Globus University. Darren's based in Japan, in Tokyo. Darren's also a contributing writer for Forbes, Fast Company, a TEDx speaker, and is part of the IDEO U teaching team. So lots of human-centered design knowledge as well that Darren brings. Darren, talking about Forbes, you wrote an article on Forbes about remote leadership before it was even famous. So firstly, welcome. Hello.
Yeah, thanks, Prina, and thanks for having me here. Great to be on the session as well.
Oh, you're welcome. Darren, today I'd like to talk to you about remote leadership done right. And you wrote an article a long time ago before remote leadership was even a thing, before it was even popular. So I'm really pleased to be talking to you about today, because from when you wrote about the article to now, things have certainly changed.
Really changed, yeah.
Really changed. Over to you in terms of, do you want to talk about the article? Do you want to talk about remote leadership, your learnings, your expertise in that aspect, Darren?
Yeah, thanks, Prina. I mean, it's like you said, this is something I've been teaching and writing about for a couple of years. I'm practicing for even longer as well in kind of my different jobs. And so, yeah, it was great to see that this articles have become more relevant to people and become more timely, of course, unfortunately as well. But yeah, this whole topic of, remote leadership, I think it really boils down to, and as I mentioned in one of the articles, it really boils down to trust and how you need to, as a leader or as a member of a remote team, right? I mean, and again, leader, I think we talk about leaders, we don't necessarily mean formal managers. Anybody can be a leader with their peers, for example, as well. It boils down to really the issue of how do you establish like trust and psychological safety on remote teams? Because there's been a lot of research out there, like Google did this Project Aristotle, where they looked at all their high-performing teams within Google, and they found that the one common factor that stood out for each high-performing team was the leader gave an environment of psychological safety and trust. That was the one factor that stood out. And that was true for co-located teams, but also for remote teams as well.
Right.
Now, of course, that's more important now because most of us are working remote. I have been back in my office in Rico twice in the last 7 months. So it's pretty much all been remote, teaching entirely remote now from home as well. And personally, I enjoy it. I find it's a great way to reach a wider range of people, for example, like this. Not everyone, though, is kind of as amenable or as comfortable or as happy doing it. But I think it also boils down to the environment that the leader sets up. And that, again, goes back to this idea of trust. So, as a leader, what can you do to build trust, whether it's within the same culture or another culture? And I think one of the things to do is you really have to show interest in your team's members as people. Now,
Yes.
it sounds like it's kind of obvious. You should be doing it as a leader anyway, but not all obvious things are practiced as much. And so, but I think goes beyond just the things like, how was your weekend? Or, what did you do? Or, how are you this morning? It's more like a deep curiosity about them. Particularly, this is important if you're launching a virtual team. It's getting to them and know them as people, but it's also getting to know their work styles, their work habits. So there's obvious things like, not obvious maybe, but is each person a night owl or are they a lark in the morning? This is important for knowing when you schedule meetings. Do people work best head down, or do they work best in collaborative environments? And these it's very two simple things to start with. But by doing that, or when I like to launch a project team, I think I talked about this in the Forbes article, we do like a spectrum activity on a scale from introvert to extrovert. Where are you? On a scale of strategic to operational, where do you fall? Like big picture or details? And asking these things about all the team members and helping understand how each individual will contribute to the team.
Yeah.
It can help you know them as individuals better and how they can maximize their benefit to the team, but also where they may struggle.
Yes.
At the same time, where they may thrive and kind of pushing people in those directions as well. So that's a big part of it. getting to know your team by this honest curiosity about who they are as individuals, and then structuring things around that. And a big part of that structure is to have kind of formal norms and processes and rituals around things like communications charter. We just assume we're going to communicate like this. Yeah, but more specifically, and have the team take ownership of this, have the team feel like they contribute by creating a communications charter. We're going to have this many calls using this communication channels, using this technologies, all that stuff will go a long way towards having trust between you as the leader. And one thing I should also mention about trust is there's kind of two types of trust. The proper term is cognition-based trust and emotive trust. And emotive trust is kind of trust between team members, like kind of we're buddies, we're friends, we support each other. That's more important. They're both important, the emotion-based trust and the cognitive-based trust. But between team members, that emotion-based trust has a bigger impact on the team's performance. From the leader, that cognitive-based trust. I trust you to do the work. I trust your skills. I'm not going to micromanage you. That has a far bigger impact coming from the leader. So when we say trust, there's different types of trust, but from a leader, that's why, micromanaging is the worst thing you can do on, any team, but especially for a remote team, because how can you micromanage people who are in different city, country, time zone, halfway around the world? You have to trust them. If you don't trust them, they'll know that, and they'll begin to kind of isolate and push themselves away. So that was a bit of a long spiel there. I'll take a breather now and turn it back over to you.
I got my pen and paper out, Darren. Yeah. I got
Yeah.
excited about that. I will link information about Project Aristotle in the show notes, but I really talk to you about trust also. So my experience as a coach or as a consultant for teams, it was really interesting last year. So the teams that I helped with the emotional intelligence aspects and getting to know each other through various psychometric tests that I'm qualified in versus the teams who didn't do the psychometric tests or have those conversations, they're at a different place, both, doing what they can right now. So the cognitive, what did you call it? Cognitive trust?
Cognition-based trust, yes.
Cognition-based trust and emotional trust is so high for the teams that I did do those tests with prior to, the changes that happened within our world. And a lot of those leaders are tapping into the results from the psychometric test. Like, ooh, you're quite the strategic thinker and you like to work in the evening or during chunks of time. So let me give you this piece of work. Or managers understand how people actually get stressed out from a working from home perspective and can really tap into it. Managers also understand with the work that I helped them with last year on how they can tap into using that team member to support that team member because they know their capabilities also. So it's so much richer if you do know your team. But if you don't know your team from both of those aspects, there are ways that you can get around it with the practical applications that you just mentioned also. And a lot of it is just conversational now, right? Also,
it really is. Yeah. Like, I mean, over communicate is important as for a remote team leader, but over communicate is not just the volume of communication. It's also over communicate in different channels. Like know when email is a good time to do, know when a one-to-one video conference, know when a group conversation, know when chat, like all the different communication channels we have at our disposal now, they have their pros and cons, but kind of matching the tool to the message is also an important part of being a leader. So like very emotional, heated topics, usually video, one-to-one or call is a better way to do that. But sometimes there's times maybe an email is actually better because it kind of cools things off as well. So it's kind of knowing also how to match the technology, right? There's, I forgot to mention, there's this framework I came up with about how to manage or operate on any remote team. I call it TLC. Now, not the TLC you're thinking of, right? But it's technology, leadership, and culture. So how to manage all three of those is really key to thrive on, as managing a global team. Leadership, of course, is your own leadership, knowing yourself, but also knowing how to lead others. Technology, again, collaboration tools, communication tools. When's the best one? Culture is a trickier one because it includes, of course, national culture is a one, and that's where you mentioned emotional intelligence. Also, you can throw in the cultural intelligence piece there. It can also include national language as well, but there's also corporate culture. Which comes into play, and even team culture or even functional culture, right? There's that's the trickiest one to kind of manage for remote teams, I think, as well. So that TLC is like a Venn diagram of like 3 circles: technology, leadership, culture. The sweet spots in the middle. If you can get all of those, then you can get a team to kind of thrive and prosper.
And while we're talking about that C word, culture is, another speciality of mine. It's really, really fascinating. And good that you broke it down in that respect, in that we do have organizational cultures, absolutely so. But then you can have subcultures within your team also that you as a leader get to create. And how are you going to create those? It's by those various tools and
Yeah.
techniques that you just talked about from that TLC framework perspective. Absolutely so. Darren, you also talk about what I love in your article. You talk about no chance for casual collisions.
Yeah, casual
So
collisions. Yeah.
I love that, because when I was working in, corporate land, I used to love the casual collisions are the best thing. So kitchen conversations as you're making a cup of tea. I'm a tea drinker, so, many cups of tea and many conversations, such rich conversations around, the coffee station or whatever.
In the
But
elevator, in the hallway, whatever, right? Yeah.
yeah, we don't have that anymore.
We
However,
don't.
we can create new
Yeah.
things. Could you tell me a little bit more about that, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people have probably heard about the idea now that we need to have like, a virtual water cooler chat,
Yes.
where, right? But it gets back to something I mentioned earlier about formalizing these things, making it like almost like a ritual, like, on Friday afternoons from 4 to 5, we're just going to get together and not talk about work so much, or maybe a few times a week, like once in the morning, once in the afternoon, coffee, tea time,
Yeah.
beer, or whatever time zone appropriate beverage it is, if it's a global team as well, just to have this downtime. And like, you don't talk about work, you talk about everything else, you catch up. You can do this one-to-one as well. And I think we often think of these water cooler chats as being like one-to-many. I mean, the team get together, but
Right.
one-to-one is a great way to do it as well. You can do this through, if you have Slack, for example, or Microsoft Teams, I don't think people utilize them enough for this, like, offsite. Like, I work with IDEO, we have a Slack channel called Water Cooler. It's just for the stuff where we just talk about irrelevant to the job stuff, but it's just kind of fun, right? Like, here's this weekend, here's a photo of my dog, whatever. These are the kind of friendly conversations that we have to kind of replicate. And that gets back to the point about building trust as well.
Yes.
It's so important for the leader, because this is how you kind of get a sense of what's going on kind of under the surface of the team as well. Because again, you can pick up those things when you're in the office, like you see people are kind of not talking to each other, or there's some kind of like little friction going on. You can't really know that just by doing emails, or even like, once a week Zoom calls or whatever. So there's ways you can pick up on these things on this casual collisions. And that's also where you learn about the company as well. You learn what's going on in the scuttlebutt, learn the gossip in a good way that's going on for organizations. So it helps build awareness about that. So, you can replicate that by these like water cooler chats once a week, but you can also do these one-to-ones with your different team members who are operating at distance as well. What's going on, particularly important if they are feeling a bit of like social isolation, or if they're feeling a bit, you mentioned about the culture of projects and like subcultures forming. There's a real risk that's underappreciated for remote teams, is this idea of team fracture, is that teams can break up around these things, around, imbalances and like power imbalances, or perceived or real power imbalances, or language, right? Often working with my Japanese colleagues, we find, we have a Japanese group and a non-Japanese group, and often we don't always, we have to like consciously get everyone to be talking together. So these things can fracture around culture, language, office, function, whatever. And so the leader has to really be on top of this stuff. The casual collisions is one way, replicating those. It's also how you get the innovation out of your team, because at the end of the day, that's really what we want to do, right? We want to have our teams innovate as well and create value, not just be like, talked about, we've got past the point now where we are surviving on remote teams.
Yeah.
Now we have to move on to like, this is the norm. How are we going to thrive, innovate, create value going ahead with these remote teams? And these are some ways to do it as well, right? So, the casual collisions is, hey, what are you working on? I'm working on this. How about you? Oh, look at that. We can maybe collaborate. You gave me a great idea. I gave you a great idea. This is where the innovation and value comes out of those casual collisions also. So duplicating that, replicating that, yeah.
Beautiful. Casual collisions, and then you can formalize things also. One of the teams I used to work in corporate land, when we had our online catch-ups, every morning my manager set up a morning huddle, Darren. And in that huddle, I loved it. She asked some really tough questions, which, initially we thought, ooh, we're really opening ourselves up here, but I see why she did it now. Question number one was, how are you today? What are your priorities for today? What challenges do you have, and what help do you need from me?
Right, yeah. The last question is key though. How can I help you as well, right?
Because she couldn't read our minds. And, working remotely, I felt like, should I bug her? Should I not? Because you don't know, because you can't see that person visually. And then the final question was an emotional check-in, which I thought was, whoa, it's out there. Some days we have good days, some days we have bad days. And I really noticed as a team, there were 5 of us in the team, as we, spoke and as we got more comfortable with our daily huddles in that emotional aspect, especially at the end of the session when we said we're feeling great, we're not feeling so great. We had that chance to take it offline. Hey, T, I'll call you afterwards. Let's have a coffee conversation, a tea conversation, just to check in. How can I help you? So it took that burden away from my manager to have to support all of us as well. And we could, self-manage as a team. So I thought that was beautiful.
And, something that we don't, people may think it's a bit flippant, but, using the emoji, how are you
Yes.
feeling today?
Okay.
It's a simple thing, but it's, again, it gets these things across as well, right? How are you feeling today? Like a happy face or neutral or frowny or whatever, right?
Yeah.
This is the way to do, these are ways to do it as well.
Yeah, it's doable. It reminds me of, Changi Airport at Singapore. As you walk out of the bathrooms, they give you a little bit of a survey on the, the one you
Exactly.
click
Yeah,
in
I
with
know
the
the one you
smiley
mean. Yeah.
faces.
Yeah.
So it works. Darren, you also talk about communicating your curiosity in the article. Now,
Yeah.
what do you mean by communicating your curiosity with the team? What does that entail?
Again, I think this ties back to maybe something I mentioned earlier about getting to know them as individuals, but like not just in a transactional manner. I want to, we're a team, let's get to know each other, but I want to know what makes them tick individually and as a team as well. So, I think I've seen, when I try to teach this and coach folks on this point, like to be a team leader, you have to be, again, more like a transformative leader rather than a transactional leader. And this is part of it. Being a transformative leader is caring about the team members as individuals, right?
Yeah.
And that also means you as as a team leader, that vulnerability thing goes two ways as well, right? So having an interest in them, I'm curious about you, yes, as a team member, as a colleague, but also as a person. So like what makes you tick? The work-related things like, early riser, late riser, strategic, operational, those things, but also, what, you as a person, what's going on in your life outside work.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't do that. I mean, and what you said earlier about your previous team leader, that's a great example of how you can do that as well. And how hard is that to do remotely as well? It's not at all. Just taking the time to do it and be aware of doing it, thinking about it as well.
Yeah. And it becomes a part of your DNA then, once you get used to it also as a team.
And that's why it comes back to that point I mentioned about rituals, formalizing these things. We just, this is our team identity. It's our team culture now. This is how we operate. And when your team has that kind of sense of like culture, shared norms, shared experiences, like any other culture, we're all in it together. We're the team. It boosts that strength and psychological safety as well.
Yeah. Darren, you talked about another thing which really fascinated me. So cross-culturally, I find it really interesting. I have worked in the UK and I have worked in Australia and I've got clients globally. Now, from a office perspective of working in the UK and office perspective comparing it to working in Australia, in the UK, we had far more boundaries. We were far more distant from our team members. We didn't share so much. Then I moved to Australia and oh my gosh, that was quite the change for me where people want to know you as a person. They want to know about your personal life. They want to know about what you're doing on the weekend. In the UK, we didn't really used to talk about those kind of niceties, whereas, in Australia, we are far more matey. You could call it.
I was going to say that, use that word.
It's a mateship culture here, right?
Right.
So I found that difficult to transition to, but, beautiful now because it works. But not all countries, not all cultures have that globally.
Yeah,
really
I went the opposite way, for example, right? I went from Canadian culture, from Toronto, where I'm from, and which is relatively, probably comparable to Australian culture in that regard as well, to Japan, which is a more kind of, it's more high context. Work relationships are much more hierarchical and kind of formalized. I've had lots of mistakes I made at the beginning, but I've overcome those. And now, trying to help other people understand how to bridge those cultural gaps. It's so important. I mean, it's a learning experience. So it's another dimension to, how to build remote trust is even, we talked about, and this is something I wrote in another article about common sense is not so common. And this is even more true across cultures. So there's this idea that, we have the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated yourself. That does not work across cultures because everyone's context is different. So it requires, so back to this point about curiosity, it requires if a team member is, even within like US, Australia or Canada, multicultural societies is equally true as well. But if you have team members, especially who are in a different cultural context in different country, curiosity about their culture. Everyone loves it when you're curious about their culture, right? And there's a simple way to do it as well. And then, well, how do people build trust in your culture? Trust I like to use when I'm doing this consulting and training the culture map framework from Erin Meyer, which is a really good read. And she talks about trust can be built through transactions or relationships. Those are kind of the two extremes in cultures. And of course, it's a spectrum as well, right? But
Yeah.
Japan's a very actual relationship-based culture as well, whereas North American and I think Australian and British culture somewhat are more transaction-based. You build trust more on your job title, your role, your background. That's more important. The contract as well, the written stuff is more important. Whereas in Japan, and I think somewhat true in Southeast Asia and East Asia as well, it's more about building relationships and building trust and getting to know you as a person. That's how you build trust, so those relationship building. And I think it's true in some Latin cultures as well. So there's another way, communicating curiosity goes both ways. If someone's from a very, transactional culture, they may, don't go too far, right? But getting to them as people.
Fine line, isn't there?
There's and so that's the, back to that TLC, that culture piece, the national culture, and understanding how things vary across cultures. So that's where you bring in the platinum rule, right? The golden rule you drop, the platinum rule, treat other people how they would like to be treated. That requires knowing them, knowing their culture. But, culture, there's a fine line between understanding culture and like stereotypes. So we use the national culture as like a starting point, but people are individuals and we treat them as individuals once you get to know them better as well, regardless of what the consultant may say about the national culture, for example, as well, right? So everyone's not the same. There's diversity within all cultures, but these provide some rules, some good ground rules for starting points as well.
Brilliant. Darren, earlier you talked about micromanagement and lack thereof, especially in our remote world of working.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for managers of how not to micromanage?
Well, this goes back to the point about if you establish processes and norms of how people are going to operate in a team, and you give people, the flip side of, so obviously trust implies autonomy for the team members. So, you can't micromanage people around the world. So you have to give them some autonomy. But the flip side of autonomy is accountability, of course. With the autonomy, you have to have accountability. So kind of, formalizing some of these things, expectations. But expectations and accountability strictly on outcomes, not on process.
Right.
This is a big difference, right? And again, some cultures treat this a bit differently. In Japan, process often matters a lot, for example, as well. But keeping people accountable to results is one way to do it. And how they do it doesn't matter. Right? Yeah. Just let them do it their own way, especially if they're in different cultural contexts. Things will be done differently. But giving people autonomy with results-based accountability, I think is the best way to do it as well. Yeah.
I had a really good manager who used to, at the end of the week, ask for all of us in her team to respond to her with the outputs for this week, just so she could advocate, to her manager and then plan for the next week ahead and next week ahead also. So, we used to have one-to-ones, but this was in addition to that, just so we've got that documented, because the world of work has changed. And I guess leaders are far more accountable in that respect of reporting to whoever they report to on a weekly, however frequent basis.
Totally true. Yeah. I mean, we always forget our bosses have to report to their bosses, etc. They have to be accountable as well.
Yeah. That was a big takeaway. So to wrap this up, Darren, I have one final question for you. Give me one way you would change the way of our workplace in relation to remote leadership.
One way. There's a lot, of course. But, if I could pick one, recently I've been a lot of online courses and webinars. Everyone's talking about productivity, efficiency.
Yeah.
Less about that, more about creativity. I think this is one of my forthcoming articles I want to write as well, by the way. This is a bit of a preview, but I mean, we talk too much about productivity, efficiency, which of course is important, but how to have creativity, because going back to the point about culture, we have the opportunity to have much more diverse teams now. And as we know, diverse teams take more initially to get to the point where they can, but they are so much more innovative and creative as well. So I think I would try to change the conversation to be less about efficiency and productivity and more about creativity and innovation, how that should be one of the goals of remote work as well, because the work that we should be doing should be around that. It shouldn't be about processes and forms and checking boxes, because we don't need to be doing that anymore. This will be more true going in the future when machines can do that more and more for us. So more and more our work is going to be focused on creativity and innovation. So I think it'd be nice, companies, individuals who can get a head start on that are going to do a lot better.
Oh, I think there's another conversation to be had another time, Darren, on this topic.
Could be, yes. Ooh. I got the article out first and do some stuff on that. Yeah.
I look forward to reading it. Darren, so if people want to contact you, I'm going to share all of your details
Yeah.
in the
Thank
show
you.
notes. They're welcome to contact you. You've also mentioned the TLC framework. You've talked about Project Aristotle. You talked about some other tips as well. So I'll share all of that in our show notes. So if people want to
Great.
pick
Yeah.
your brain about that, they are very welcome
Yeah,
to.
the TLC framework is my own
Ah,
proprietary framework. So
yeah.
if you want, I can find something on that as well. Yeah.
Otherwise, people will listen and take notes, as I have been also. It's been a
Yeah.
brilliant, brilliant conversation, Darren.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to re-listen and take more notes, no doubt.
Great. Okay.
I
Take
appreciate your
care.
time and creativity to be discussed in the future, I think.
Definitely.
Love
Yes.
that. Thank you, Darren.
Yeah, thanks, Prina. Bye, everyone.
Bye.